Okay, so Mark Binskin got the intro of pilot, and people ask me, what's your background and all that. I don't talk about all the other stuff. I'm a pilot. My history is uh, before this. I left school at 17 and learnt to fly. So Camden, learnt to fly at Canberra's VH Aviation back then. It eventually became corporate air. But I learnt to fly in Cessna 150s there, the 152, with, don't know if you know him, he's an infamous instructor, Ken Andrews, his instructor. Yep, he was my instructor. What a brilliant pilot he was. Ex-Sea Furies, I think, in the Navy, ex-RG test pilot, and just a fantastic all-round guy to learn to fly with. I finished my restricted license. I actually went to Downs Department Store in Campbelltown, for those that think back that far, to start a cadetship there. About 6 weeks in, when I started applying for the Navy and the Air Force, they decided that wasn't for me, which was good because it wasn't for me. Uh, and I was accepted into the Navy on one day, and I was accepted in the Air Force the very next day. And I went with my heart at the time and joined the Navy, never realising how hard it was to end up flying fighters, but went through training. Came out of pilot's course in September '79. I was 19 and started flying the A4. And just after my 20th birthday, I did my deck quals in an A4 on HMAS Melbourne. Only daytime, so I didn't scare myself at night, which is quite interesting when you look back at, I don't let my kids, I didn't let my kids drive my car at 20, and here they are letting a 20-year-old fly fast jet onto what was the smallest deck in the world at the time. But I learned a lot with Navy and had some brilliant experiences there. A couple of years of flying A4s and the exchange with Mirages came up as an opportunity. I put my hat in my ring and was offered that exchange. So off to Williamtown on exchange with 77 Squadron flying Mirage. Did a tactical reconnaissance course there at 77 Squadron. That's actually a TAC Recce Mirage for those that are looking at noses of aeroplanes. Did that. In the middle of all that, the government came in and decided to disband the fixed wing part of the fleet air arm and get rid of the carrier. It was around the Falklands time. So I changed over to the Air Force. That in itself, how many hours you got? Because that wasn't a simple task at the time. I actually had to go back through recruiting to do that. And the first response I got from Air Force recruiting was a letter. And we were on deployment in Darwin at the time. I was a B category Mirage fighter pilot. TAC Recce qual, and I got the letter back saying, thanks, there's no vacancies for people with your qualifications at the moment. The commanding officer at the time, Al Tithridge, I think it was, said, give me that, I'll fix that. Took about 8 months and ended up in the Air Force. Did fighter combat instructors course. Actually, I started it as a Navy officer with shorts and long socks as a fighter combat instructor course. Halfway through the course, the paperwork came through. Went to Sydney, got out of the Navy one night and into the Air Force the next day, and then flew back to Williamtown. My wife didn't recognise me in a blue uniform then. She was used to a white uniform. So much so she came up to me next to the bar and said, where's Vinny? And they all pointed at this guy in a blue uniform. Did fighter combat instructors course, graduated off that, instructed on Mirages for about 2 months, then went to the States on the first pickup of the F-18. Brought those back and we introduced them into Australian service. Served in 77 Squadron in most positions. 75 Squadron, which is that one there, as the executive officer of. And in the middle of all that, I was privileged to go and be a flight commander in a US Air Force F-16 Squadron for 3 years in Phoenix in Arizona. So really good background and some fantastic flying posts. After the Air Force, I did a lot of other stuff. After the Air Force, and now, this is the aviation in the Binskin family. So how many aeroplanes you need? N+1. It's just like motorbikes and cars. So around about 2012, as Vice Chief of Defence Force, having a very frustrating time in that job, came home one day and Gita said, what's wrong? I said, I need to go flying again. And she said, well, why don't we buy an aeroplane? Oh, we're off. So at the time, looking for something that wasn't fast jet, I went totally the opposite direction. And for those at Haas used to know Gordon Glynn when he was around, Gordo had rebuilt a couple of bird dogs. That green dog there is the one that that we're looking at and end up going for a 5 Gordo and end up buying that. Had to put it somewhere. Temora seemed like the right place at the time. We built a hangar out there. My wife said, yeah, we've got room for another aeroplane. That would be the black one there, which is with the Spitfire, it's an F1 rocket, which is a brilliant little aeroplane to fly. TASs out about 185, 190. Great for gentlemen's aerobatics and formation flying and the works. And then my wife in her 50s decided if he can't beat us, join him. Beat him, join him, and she learned to fly. She went down an RA Oz route, and that's her little aeroplane there, which is a little Italian Technam aircraft. So that's the sort of aviation. Now we also fly 182 around Australia and do some touring. So when I'm not at work doing the board and all that sort of stuff, we take time away to just go and visit outback pubs and things and enjoy the country. And I really love this country. It gives us a chance to do it. Which brings me to the right bit, which is flying for the Temora Aviation Museum. Well, we set ourselves up at Temora with a hangar out there, and I'm on the governing committee. And got asked, did I want to fly one of the aircraft? And people go, why? You know, you could jump at the Spitfire or whatever. And a couple of reasons. I love to fly the Spitfire, but I wouldn't trust myself with it. I don't have that background of that heavy tail wheel experience, which the guys that fly it do. They're all ex-crop dusters or they've worked their way up. But at the time, we were talking about bringing the Canberra back into service. So when I was Chief of Air Force in 2009 timeframe, 8, 9, we had 6 missing in action still in Vietnam from the Vietnam War. And they were slowly bringing back the remains, identifying, bringing back the remains of the Army, which were 4, but we had 2 Air Force from a Canberra bomber that had disappeared. And there were myths and legends about it was shot down by a man-pad or an SA-2 or whatever, but they didn't know where it was. And at the time, I just read a book called The Silent Service about US submarines. And they had a submarine back in the 60s called the USS Scorpion that had departed the Straits of Gibraltar and never arrived in Groton. And they used the method to find out where it was. And they knew when it departed, and they had one SOSUS hit. And through going through the most likely courses of events that led to that, they narrowed down to about a 10 square mile sort of circular area of probability where the submarine remains were, and it was actually in that. So I just read that and I thought, well, if that's the case, why can't we go back and find the Canberra? So got DSTG to do some using new modelling tools. We got some of the ex-Canberra guys from Vietnam on. We knew exactly where the release point was on a bombing raid that they'd done at night. We knew where they were heading. We knew where they were turning. So give all that to DSTG, and then those that were flying there at the time, every time DSTG came to a question about what you had done now, this is what we would have done. And they mapped out a little splay in South Vietnam or where they thought it might be. We sent a team in. Long story, this itself will take an hour and I won't go into it, but the team found someone that had come across wreckage. They went in, found some wreckage, didn't know if it was a B-57, which is US Air Force version of Canberra. They found some rubber that had NLO on it. We flew with Dunlops, US flew with Goodyears, a couple other things that they found were remains from one of the pilots, one of the crew, and decided that was ours. And so I was Chief of Air Force. We went through repatriation. I went to North Vietnam, or Vietnam, to Hanoi, met up with our minister at the time. We went with the Vietnamese forces. We got the remains out. We brought them back to Australia. And so that got my passion going for Canberra. So when they asked me what I wanted to fly, I said I want to bring the Canberra back into service. And so ended up being a part of bringing this aircraft back into service. Now, I'll talk about its history in a second. Never flew in the Royal Australian Air Force until flying in 100 Squadron in the last couple of years. It's a British aircraft, but it is painted up in 2 squadron colours. It's painted up in colours of the aircraft that CO of 2 Squadron at the time was flying in Vietnam, John Downing. Downing. So he flew it. They did a forward air control close air support mission with US Army, I think it was. They got down below the cloud. They did 5 bombing passes with a bird dog doing the close air support. They fragged themselves on the last pass, nearly severed the elevator rod. got the aircraft back, and out of that they both ended up, the pilot and the navigator ended up with the Distinguished Flying Cross, I think, Distinguished Service Cross from the US Air Force. So that's the aircraft. What's its history? They said it never flew in Royal Australian Air Force colours until it flew in 100 Squadron from 2021-22 onwards. It is a Mark II aircraft, so it's one of the original Canberra bombers. It first flew in '55 and went to the RAF in Rough Gütersloh in Germany. It ended up with a couple of accidents. They had a bird strike at one stage and landed gear up. It had a hydraulic failure where the navigator was ordered to eject by the pilot, and the pilot brought the thing back flapless. And I think that ended up with gear up off the end of the runway as well. So repaired a couple of times, converted to a target tower in 1967. It used to have pylons on the wings. If you ever saw photos of those, they were taken off when it came across to Temora. It retired from 100 Squadron RAF in December '91, which was interesting. It did air shows for a couple of years over there where it got the living hell beaten out of it with high G and manoeuvres. And it was acquired by Temora Aviation in May '02. When it came out, it was still painted in the target towing colours, which was silver. I think it was yellow and black bands and the things for visibility. 4,800 hours on it then. It hasn't had that much more put on it, so we're just over 5,000 now. It was on the ground from June 2010 until June 2021 when we started, when we first flew it again, but it was starting to be brought back to life in about 2019. The intent was to bring it back for the centenary, Air Force centenary. There were some issues with 100 Squadron management at the time. They didn't see the imperative for that, which was really frustrating. So as David Lowy had gifted all these aircraft back for $1 at Air Force to have them all flying. That's another 1 hour story as well. But it went through a lot of work to get it back to flying. The specifications, the way in its form when it flew with the RAF, it's two 6,500-pound thrust engines. These are the Mark I Avons, they're the smaller ones. Our Mark 20 aircraft had 7,400 100 pounds of thrust on each side. And I'll talk about one of the devices of the aircraft in a minute, which is asymmetric. It must have been a handful with that. We flew maximum 11,000 pounds of fuel internal. It could take a bomb bay tank and it could take tip tanks if we wanted to do it. Max takeoff weight, we never got there, 45,000 pounds. And I'll talk about what it was for us in a minute. 450 knots indicated, Mach 0.84, stall speed back alone about 90 knots. So it's a bloody nice wing on the aeroplane. Up to 4G and could get up to flight level 500. And, you know, NASA modified them to go higher. RAF modified PR9s to go higher as well. But 50,000 feet is what it was down to go to. So not bad for an aeroplane. What did we decide? It was designed in '44, from '44 onwards. And initially basically mosquito replacement, low and fast, and then ended up high and fast. You could fly it either or in the middle of it. So pretty impressive. And when you talk to the engineers at Temora, they think this is simpler than a Spitfire. And you look at the engines, there's not a lot of moving parts in the engine. How many moving parts in a Merlin? About 23,000 or something rather. So the guys and girls at Temora love working on this and bring it back into service. Modifications. So I did a lot of modifications in its time with TAM. You know, wheels and brakes. There was the engine start system. I'll talk about each of these in a minute. Ejection seat and canopy cartridges were an issue for us because to keep the cartridges for the seat required Martin Baker to be on board. Martin Baker weren't supporting these sorts of seats at that time. And ejection seat cartridges and canopy cartridges started to get dangerous. Avionics modifications. Avionics should be a little avionics because it didn't have a lot. We'll talk about that in a minute. And the target towing pylons were taken off. I can show that these guys, but I can't do it online. Target towing pylons used to sort of sit about here. And they're like just big slabs. So that was the modifications. Each one of those, first of all, looked at wheels and brakes. This is before I flew it. This was done back in the early days the Temora used to have 19-inch wheels and pretty small brakes. The runway at Temora at the time was only about 4,700 feet, and they were operating off it. And then looked at what they needed to replace it. Basically, just put the what we had in the Mark 20 that we had, which was a 21-inch wheels, better brakes, and max braking, which is early anti-skid braking on it. These brakes are impressive, and they pull this thing up really quickly, like they're really quickly. The only thing I was ever wary of was operating off a wet runway. And that goes back to my days as a kid watching the Richmond Air Show in 1971, where there was a lot of rain and the Canberra sailed off the end of the runway and through the barrier, and everyone gave a golf clap thinking it was a part of the show. So very wary about operating off wet runways, and we were operating off shorter runways at Temora, even the 6,700-foot runway, if it was wet, worried me. And so we started off with dry runways, and then I went to no standing water after a while when I got used to it. But these are good, very good brake and tyre combination. So that was put on early on in its time with us. The electric start. So for those that are connoisseurs of the Canberra starting up, where dogs and kids cowered, cats ran up trees and all sorts of things, the cartridge start. So the cartridge, you used to unscrew the nose and put a cartridge in. Actually, I think I might have 2 shots of this. Cartridge in, and when you hit the starter button, the cartridge exploded and wound this thing up to about 4,500 RPM like that. Smoke everywhere most of the time, but it was very carcinogenic. It damaged the engines, and when one went off, bits went everywhere as well. Not great for displays near people. So Temora determined they could actually put an electric start on the aeroplane. And when they went and had a close look at it, you need a starting system. So there's a mob in Canada, I think called Loite, that had made a starting system for hunters that they had for target towing, where they put an electric start on it. So they had a starting system that we knew would do the right sequencing, and it had been certified, which was important. But how do you put an electric start on this? And so they went into the research and found that the Comet Mark IV and an Avon Mark 26, good British engineering, what they had on that as an electric start was retrofittable to a Mark I Avon. So the electric start actually sits in this nose cone. And so for the plane spot a bit, they kept it exactly the same as it would have been, or it was for the cartridges, but they put the electric start in here. That's great, but how do you get power to it? So then they routed power through, not this side, but this on the other side, this inlet vein, drilled through all that, put the wires through it, and ran the wires from here and down into the aircraft. Now that starter system takes 120 volt AC, which is not your standard battery. So how do you do that? You do 524 volt batteries in series, but where do you put them? Simple on this thing, you put them in a bomb bay. And so they built a cradle and put these batteries in series. The engineering in this was magnificent. The team did a great job. You can't quite see it, but the wires go up, and up in the front they end up going out to the engines either side. This would start the jet very well. The starter system, you hit the start button and it just smoothly wound up. 1,000 RPM, you'd put the high pressure cock up, and it just smoothly wound up. Never had a start problem at all in the time that I flew it. And then after that, this became my emergency battery. If I had a double generator failure or inverter failure and problems, I had enough spare power in this battery to probably take me to New Zealand and back. It was emergency power was never a problem because of the battery mod. The other important thing here when I start talking about asymmetrics is this weight, where it was in the bomb bay, moved the center of gravity forward on the jet, which came into play when we started looking at the asymmetric performance of it. But brilliant engineering from the Temora team, Andy Bishop and the team, for those that know him out there. Seats and canopy, took the crackers out of the seat and took the cartridges out of the canopy. When we started to look at flying again, it had not been flying with people wearing parachutes or anything like that. Air Force said, we want you to wear parachutes, to which we said, why? And so I know if there's an emergency, why? It's a 2-engine aeroplane. B, there is no emergency that has a mandated ejection. The Sabre was different, and that was why it never came back into the service. But the Canberra, even if you had a double engine failure, I'd be quite happy dead sticking it into a paddock. They still talked about wanting a parachute. So the person that we said who was talking about that, we strapped him into the jet in the hangar and said, right, you've had an emergency, get out. So had to get out of the seat, get down, wind the door open, and then he flopped out into the mattress. You want to know how long it took him to bail out of the aeroplane? 2.5 minutes. After that, we went away from having to think about our parachutes. We went back and looked at the logic of it all. But it is difficult to get in and out of, and the seat is over on the left-hand side, and that's so that the bomb or navigator, bomb aimer, could get down the side and lay in the nose. This jet's got 3 ejection seats in it. Ours only had 2. So this is the early one where they actually did have a navigator and they did have a bombardier. In its target towing role, though, they took an engineer in the 3rd seat. On the ground, if I needed to do a ground egress, what do you do? Because all your emergency exits are now closed. So there's a snatch in the control column for the ejection where the carts were taking out as well. But if I had a problem on the ground and ran off the runway, gear folded, and I end up laying on its right side, there's a possibility I couldn't get out on that right-hand door. So what we did was we decided, I looked at what the most appropriate cockpit extraction tool was, and it's good being in a bomber, because that's a Milwaukee 18 watt circular saw strapped there between the seats. They're the 2 back seats, by the way, down there. And when they gave me a bit of perspex to practice on with this thing, after that, I reckon if I'd ever had a problem with this, I could have cut the whole nose off and walked out of the jet. It was impressive. Now, it is a lithium battery. We never charged it in the aeroplane. It was always checked and the like. But that was in there because the thickness of the canopy, for those that have seen it, it's a 2 perspex canopy with a wafer in the middle for moisture. And so it's about that thick. There's no way a normal canopy cutting tool would have got me out of it. So that was what we decided to put in it. That's the cockpit extraction tool. Avionics, that's them. So there's an old Garmin GPS there on the right, and this sits there in the cockpit. It's not in front of you. It's here on the cockpit, and it's an old basic Garmin. Now, I'd actually flown with these back in the early 2000s when I first started working GPS, so I was quite happy working with that. Intercom panel above it, and down here, tucked away, that's the IFF, and that's the COM2. And that's about all you had. Just below this, down here, you can't see it. That's the door. Just down here is a mount where I had an iPad mini with Oz Runways on it. That was the real technology for it, and my phone. And the combination, and I had, so as backup now, this thing gets hot inside, and we originally had the iPad sitting up a bit closer where it was easier to see. I can tell you every phase an iPad goes through when it shuts down due to heat, because I saw it a couple of times and we couldn't keep it up there. We had to put it all down. So most of the avionics is on the right and down. That's actually the door down there going out. So the iPad and the phone were down in this particular area here where it was shaded, but it also meant that depending on some of the maneuvers, I would shield it from the satellite signal as well. The other thing is these radios, trying to change them in flight and fly straight and level is damn near impossible. And so I would have these radios set up with the frequency and the standby for the ones I needed. Other than that, I would use the radio frequencies in this all the time. And the IFF was also difficult to get to. So if I knew I was going in and out of controlled airspace, I could preset it all. All I had to do was flick it backwards and forwards. But if air traffic gave me a discrete squawk, that was starting to get hard. Yeah, it was a basic avionics, and for single pilot ops, which we'll talk about in a minute, these were the major considerations for it. That's the avionics. Single pilot ops, here you go. As my boys say, you feel like Virgil sitting in Thunderbird 2 when you fly this. You sit up in a little bubble and away you go. This canopy here, remember when you used to have magnifying glasses and fry bugs. Yeah, guess what that's focused on? It's focused right on the top of my helmet. So much so that my helmet that I use has got a sort of it's got a burn bit. But if I took my helmet off at the end of the flight, I had to remember to tell the ground crew when I passed it to them, just watch out you don't burn your hands on it because it just got very, very hot. Single pilot, you really wanted to be on your game as a single pilot with a good single pilot background flight because everything had to be pre-planned before you went. It was okay if you had to stop right around Samora, but we took it to Avalon a couple of times, took it to Amberley, and when you're transiting places uh, and doing frequency changes, you want to know where the runways are that you can put on the ground. You know, emergencies, the basic emergencies you want to know pretty much off by heart because you don't have anyone there to back you up and all that. So there's a lot of prep that went into making a single pilot op. So much so, because I had about 2 years of bringing it back into service, we rewrote the flight manual and just made the flight manual everything that was related to that airframe only and redid a checklist. A guy by the name of Mike Nixon, who was actually my commanding officer when I was doing Mirage conversion, who was a bit of a geek, took all the takeoff and performance data and put it into a table, so it was just straight numbers rather than trying to interpret. And so we did a lot of rewriting the flight manual, the checklist, just for this and just how we operated this jet without weapons and the like. And that made it a lot easier. Talk about flying it in a second. It took about 8 minutes to go through the start sequence. At Temora, that meant for runway 23, you're on the ground for about 15 minutes before you got airborne. For runway 05, we had to do a long backtrack, it was about 20 minutes, which is important when you're trying to do time on targets for flight paths and the like, knowing the exact time. So yeah, single pilot ops, a lot went into it. So the jet itself, so you saw all the original data. This is what we flew this aircraft to. So it's day VFR only, so no instrument flying, although I had some instruments, so I had to penetrate cloud for an emergency. I'd be quite happy to do it. And I did fly the thing in low vis, and it wasn't comfortable because that whole bubble canopy, as the visibility comes down, starts to distort where the horizon is. Maximum of 30 degrees temperature. AvMed in Air Force Ops days had done a lot of work on what the cockpit temperature got to and all that. We looked at it and decided max at 30 degrees of temperature. It varied a little bit. You could go a couple of degrees higher if it was overcast and it wasn't direct sun. Dry, vice a lot of humidity, you could get the temperature up a little bit, but 30 was a good temperature. And in summer at 30 degrees, that was about the max stop go that you could take off on it tomorrow on the runway as well, especially if the wind was less than 10 knots. So it all worked out about 30 degrees was right. I did fly it hotter than that sometimes. And for those, if anyone's ever saw the display at tomorrow, you'd see it get airborne and disappear for a while. It's getting airborne and going to 15,000 feet, just cooling off before you come back for the display. We only ever flew it to 35,000 pound max takeoff weight. So that's 10,000 pounds less than its original max takeoff weight. Becomes a factor in the asymmetric. Only up to flight to 180. That was VFR. That was the size we could go, which was okay. Max 360 knots. Flew it to 2G, although it was good to 3G. Flew it to 2G with a buffer because low level in turns it would bounce around and you could get plus or minus 0.5 of a G. So all my displays were 2G. No packs. Bombay doors are closed. We'll talk a bit more about that. We didn't do touch and goes or rollers, even though the Air Force used to do that. Again, for asymmetric, it would take time for the engines to wind up, and they didn't wind up together. As long as they wound up within 4 seconds of each other, they were good. 4 seconds is a long time with asymmetric thrust. And we flew it such that it was always rescue and firefighting available in case they end up cooking a brake or rolling off a runway and the like. You can see from this, you barely see the right gear hangs down in this. It was always the right gear was always a lot longer to come up than the left and the main. Asymmetric vice. So it's interesting. Under modern technology, you get airborne higher than your VMCA. So VMCA is minimum control speed on one engine. All modern aircraft, that control speed is before you rotate. And so should you lose an engine when you get airborne, you can always control it. Not this. This has got a VMCA of 140 knots. Now, there was a note in an early flight manual that if it was light and a forward CFG, it could get down about 125, but you wouldn't want to test it. Our technique for taking off back in the old days was they'd rotate about 110 knots, so they'd be in that dead zone for a long time and sit and accelerate with the gear down. And if they had an engine failure, the procedure was to chop the throttles and put it back onto the runway. We didn't have that luxury. And also the Brits had learnt later on in life in the Canberra, well, why do you get airborne at 110? Why don't you get airborne faster? And they came up with getting airborne at 125 knots at the weights that we were flying at. So keeping on the ground and rotating. So 125 to 140 at 35,000 pounds takeoff weight. And most days was about 2 to 3 seconds you're in that window. On a cold day, it was about 1.5 seconds, 1.7 seconds. We also had the CFG forward, and I only ever flew 11,000 pounds internal fuel if we're going somewhere. If we're displaying, or if we're just doing local Temora flights, I only had 9,000 pounds of fuel. If it's displayed, I'd do it at 7,000 pounds. It was a lot lighter. So all that risk we're trying to reduce. Air Force lost a few airplanes for asymmetric. The Brits did, we did. We lost more training for it than we actually did in real emergencies. So this was the major issue in the risk management plan. And it took a long time to talk Air Force through this, that actually there was less risk with this than there was with a Hawk or an F-35. Because if I lost an engine in a 1 second period or 2 second period, and if I didn't fly properly, which was actually to crack the throttle back so that you weren't at max thrust on the other engine. So because we're light, you just pull the engine back and just sort of lower the nose and accelerate. If I didn't do that properly in a 1 to 2 second period, it'd crash. After that, I'll fly away. Lose an engine in a Hawk or an F-35, doesn't matter how long it is, you're going to eject. Right? So trying to get this logic to Air Force was quite an interesting feat. But we went through it all, and this was the major one that we're always focused on. So much so that as I was approaching rotate, every time tearing down the runway, last thing I did was scan for birds, make sure I was not going to suck a bird down, and have a good look at the engine instruments, which in itself wasn't easy. And the minute you rotate and you clear the ground, it's a button to push the gear up and down. The gear's already cycling up, and you're lowering the nose to accelerate. But that right gear takes a while to come up, and it can be anywhere up to 10 seconds to bring the gear up. The gear speed's 170. So you can quite easily actually overspeed the gear and not get it up. So it was a technique. You either pull the throttles back or do what I used to do, was just a nice easy climb and wing over to keep the speed back at 160 and then lower the nose and accelerate to 250 in the climb. But it was always, that was the major emergency, and that was the one I always focused on. Before every flight, I briefed exactly what I was going to do to myself before I lined up and rolled on the runway. So that's the asymmetric vice. In preparation for it, that's not me in the left seat, that's Mark Skidmore, for anyone that knows skates. He was flying the Meteor at the time, and we were bringing that into service, back into service. Preparation, I had to have a CASA, even though it was an Air Force Reserve job. CASA Part 61 license, had to have multi-engine, member of AWOL, previous display experience and previous jet experience, and importantly, previous single pilot experience. And we would go to East Sale and do annual simulator training in the King Air. Believe it now, after takeoff, the techniques worked, but it wasn't good. But actually, after that, all the landing numbers that I flew for the Canberra for a single engine approach, I could fly in the King Air sim perfectly, and skates could do the same in the Meteor. So we would just go down with our Canberra and Meteor numbers and fly the King Air sim for a bit, just to get that muscle memory going. The cockpit. Now, that's a cockpit I'm used to. That's an F-18 cockpit. Pretty flash, got all the information up in the HUD, it's all digital, it's good. My rocket is that. Fantastic. Got all the information, again, digital and engine instruments and all that. Then you jump to Canberra. There is method to the British madness in here, and I'll sort of do it. On the left, you've got all the flight instruments, And the ones that you're really always looking at, the airspeed indicator, VSI, there on the right, you've got the attitude indicator. Most of the time I'm looking outside, so I'm not using that unless the visibility starts to get down. Don't worry about the mark. Weren't into that much. Altimeter down here, and the compass. Don't worry about it. Processors so much that I was always more using my iPads and using track and all that. That's the flight instruments there. You've got trims up and down the left side as well, and you had trim for elevator, aileron, and rudder, which was good. You could trim it out quite nicely. The engine panel on the right, though, notice the RPMs. They're not percentages; they're real RPMs. So RPM at idle, I think was got 2,700 plus or minus 100. I think was the 2,750 plus or minus 100, and then RPM at max was 7,800 RPM plus or minus 50. A little, you can't see it here. There's a little dial, little hand rattling around the inside. That's the thousands, and the big hand is the hundreds. So it's it's one of those ones you could, after a while, when you set the throttles, you knew moving it up and down, all I had to do was look at the big hand. But when you're doing big shifts in power, you got used to looking to the little one and making sure it was in the right spot before you looked at the big one, just out of your peripheral. Important in the circuit because you weren't allowed to go below 4,500 RPM until you're assured of landing. It's quite easy as you're pulling power back and you're trying to visually do the landing to miss the fact that that little pointer is just pointing at the four there. So it took a little bit to do that. JPT, here 600 was the max. It normally sat around about 580, 575 in the takeoff roll, and in the cruise, it wouldn't even register. So it's a pretty efficient little jet engines with it, but it sits sort of more on the bottom. Oil pressures normally set about 20 to 22, so they were easy. Then you got the fuel. So you got tank 1, tank 2 are forward, and then tank 3 sits way back behind the bomb bay. It does have a center of gravity problem. You need, if you had all the fuel left in tank 3 and everything out of tank 1 and tank 2, you're going to have an aft C of G problem. And so managing the fuel was always how am I going to manage the fuel so that I've got a fair bit left in tank 1, mainly leave most in tank 2, because if I ever had to get really low, all the fuel will come out of tank 2, but it won't come out of tank 1 and tank 3. And then if I'm going places for displays, if you're low level, takeoff or low level, you always had to have at least 2 of the 3 fuel pumps on for each of so you had tank 1 or tank 3, or tank 2 and tank 3, or whatever. You had to have 2 of the tanks feeding. Once you're airborne, you can go back to just 1 of the tanks feeding. So I used to always try and burn the fuel out of tank 3 as best as I could, down to about 500 pounds. And then after that, you're just managing the tank 1, tank 2 fuels. But this is a bit of a nightmare, testing all the fuel pumps before you get airborne and the like. Then you have low fuel pressure lights and the like. It took a bit of getting used to, but once you got used to it, you knew what you were looking at, and all the peripheral dials and that you weren't using, you tended not to focus on. The conversion itself, we brought it back into service. A guy by the name of Darren Crabb, ex-Canadian F-18 pilot, flew for me in 77 Screw and got out and started flying for David Lowy, was the chief pilot. At the time, he was the last pilot to fly it. He and a guy by the name of Rod Luke, ex-Air Commodore Air Force, who had flown him operationally. Conversion consisted of, when we were bringing to service, me doing a lot of engine runs, but also sitting down with Rod Luke for hours on end, talking to him about different techniques, what the issues were, the asymmetric side of it, how you managed the fuel, what you did, considerations. So that was the first bit. Brought the aircraft back to service. Buster did the sequences in the conversion course to do the first 3 or 5, and then that was to refresh him, and then started to instruct me to do it. First flight was a taxi it. If you could taxi this beast, you could fly it, to be honest with you, because it got differential braking with the brake. So wherever the rudder pedals were, that's where the pressure went for the brake. So you had to have the rudder dead center if you wanted to go straight and stop. Taxi it, do 2 runs up and down the runway just to get used to it with the boards, taxied in and shut it down. That was the first one. Second flight was general flying, get airborne, go out, do a stall, one stall, then do some asymmetric work down to 160, not 140, but 160, just to show that the thing will climb away quite nicely, 160 knots at 14, 15,000 feet of altitude. Do some maneuvering, learn to trim it out. I'll talk about what it's like to fly in a minute. Trim it out and then come back and do a couple of circuits, 2 low overshoots, and then land. Then the next flight was a repeat of that, do a couple of practice force landings, 2, 3. And then my next flight was a nav. And then my 5th flight was a practice display. Went up to altitude, did a practice display, and then came back and did it over the airfield. 4 flights, 5 rides, all solo. So no instructor. So a lot of it was the on-ground instruction. And it's one of those ones, does feel alien, get it airborne and flying around and go, that's great, I've got to land this bloody thing. Testament, the aeroplane is not a hard aeroplane to fly. It would be a hard aeroplane to operate, but it's not a hard aeroplane to fly. So that was the conversion course. The tasking, got a lot of Canberra fly pass over Canberra. So I used to duck in, you could scoot in underneath the cloud over Yass and all that, and then down and hold round Corin Dam. And then scoot in. The world's best initial point was the flagpole at Parliament House, because inevitably the fly pass was up Anzac Parade, or it was the War Memorial, and I knew the exact timings, and so scoot up there. Would hold out low level. The radios wouldn't work, but because I got my phone, the coordinators would just text me with a TOT, and I better come on the phone. I'd just go ack with a thumbs up, and we're good to go. So it's that. The picture on the right with the Neptune was a wings over Illawarra, which was interesting. Again, shorter runways, but hot. It was hot and humid those days. It was probably as hot as I ever got in the aeroplane. It was difficult to operate. And then up here, that's Newcastle Beach, the top left, and that was for the Newcastle Williamtown Air Show, which was just a hoot to fly past. And then Avalon, and then obviously the Temora days. So with all that task, I ended up with about 50 or 60 hours in the jet. Not a lot, but enough to love it. And the team kept the thing flying just pristinely to the end. So what's it like to fly? It is. This is one of the rides I did early on. That's the A37 with the bomb bay open. There, we wanted to have a look at how much things were moving in the bomb bay, just to get an idea of it. And that whole frame that was built for the batteries sort of wobbled like a bomb would in the bomb bay. But we decided we wouldn't open the bomb bay doors for the displays, which had been previously done. That was the first go at formation. It's a nice jet to fly, relatively stable with the ailerons. In fact, when you put ailerons in, you don't move the ailerons, you move the little tabs at the back of the aileron, and that's what moves the aileron. Slow, around 200 knots, beautiful to fly, accelerate, and get going low levels like a Harley Davidson. You want to make sure you've got a point of where you want to go before you open it up, because that's where you're going. And it would low level, it'd fly nice, a bit of turbulence, it would bang about, and it got quite tiring. But it's as smooth to fly in it as it is to sit on the ground and watch it. It's very sensitive in pitch trim, and where you sit like Virgil and Thunderbird 2, there is no nose. So it doesn't take much to up and down to end up with a couple thousand feet per minute rate of climb or descent. And the first guy, there was a guy in the States that had one, was flying it. And air traffic over there asked him what was going on, because he was up and down like a lot. And I can understand why now. It's very sensitive in pitch trim, very sensitive to power changes in pitch trim, and very sensitive to speed for pitch trim. So VSI was one of the major instruments that you're always keeping an eye on to make sure that you weren't setting yourself up for a trend. In the displays, I would use airspeed to work my radius in the turns. So, do a high speed pass and you just pull up and get the speed back about 190 to 210. And at 2G, it did quite nicely. And after a while, I could set about 6,500 RPM, 64 to 6,500 RPM, and I could just use the nose up and down and to move the speed backwards and forwards for what I needed to do the display. But the pitch trim is always moving forward and back to help you on the controls. Give you an idea of the pitch trim and the acceleration. The last pass I would do in the display is I'd do an accelerating turn with the belly up to the crowd and then roll wings level and pull up into a big wing over. I'd start that at 200 knots, come down with the belly to the crowd in the left, say most of the time it's left-hand turn. As I'm accelerating and turning left, I'm trimming those down. Because as I roll out, if I don't trim those down, as I roll out, the thing just wants to pitch straight up, 2G limit. It'd be really easy to overstress the aeroplane. So a lot in that. Accelerating for 200 to 350 for a pass, for a high-speed pass, it's just almost like continuous nose down trim as the jet's accelerating so that you can keep it level. In the circuit, you would go downwind at 190, drop the gear, hit the base turn point at 160. When you went full flap, you went full nose down trim. And that was the landing config then. And it's bring the speed back at 130 knots at the 90, roll out about 120 knots to 110, and then come across the fence 110 to 100 knots. But once you came through 500 feet, you were committed. And so, well, actually about 400 feet, you were committed. So you go, no go, because to overshoot, then you were slowly pushing the throttles up. You couldn't actually move them very quickly. And you're continuing to descend while you're putting the power up. And as you bring the gear and the flap up, then you're trimming nose up again, or the nose just wants to keep going down. So again, pitch trim was a big thing that you were working all the time on it. So that's me, and that's the jet. But let's just put the jet up. It's a beautiful aeroplane to fly. The team did a good job. Unfortunately, now it's parked. After the Gold Coast Air Show, where it went up for that, and then brought it back, we flew wings over Warbirds Down Under, and then the jet was due for an annual. And it needed 3 5-bottle squibs as a part of the annual. No one makes 5-bottle squibs for the aeroplane. That was going to be about 100, 150 grand was the initial quote. They thought they could get it down to 50 grand. And about that time, Air Force was starting to have a hard time figuring out how they're going to run all the fleet of the Warbirds. And the Defence Airworthiness System was having a hard time figuring out how it was going to keep running the jets. It just didn't gel. So the aeroplane's been parked and now put back into storage at the museum, and it now has come back to the museum. So it's no longer on 100 Squadrons register. It and the Meteor and the other jets all came back, except the Sabre. Air Force owned the Sabre. So it's parked at Temora for an annual on 3 5-bottle squibs so you can get it flying again. So if you know anyone that's got some money, that's where we're at with it. But it was a privilege to fly it for a couple of years. As a fighter guy, my last tour in the Air Force was as a bomber pilot. I can't live that down with my friends. But it was a privilege to fly it, and it is a magnificent aeroplane. And I really enjoyed the time that I got to spend on it. So that's it. Any questions? I know we're... So the jets are back in the Lowy collection at Temora. They're not going to fly unless we find funding to fly them. The prop aircraft, that Temora aircraft, are still based at Temora, maintained by the museum and flown by 100 Squadron out of Temora. So only the jets went back. Air Force did a fleet review, and they decided to retire the CT-4, Orion, a couple of other airplanes as well. They decided not to fly and kept the Mustang, the Spit, the 2 Spits. Boomerang's got a lot of work to be done on it at the moment. The Hudson, Wirraway, a couple of Tiger Moths. The RE8, if you're interested, won't fly, but we're looking at trying to get that on display at Temora if we can, because it sits in a hangar at 100 Squadron and no one gets to see it, and it's a beautiful aeroplane. So we're trying to move some aeroplanes around to get a couple of them out on display at Temora as well. Sorry, the windshield's the other one. Yeah. The problem with the CD4 was it was great for a trainer and all that, but no one looks at the CD4 and says that's a Warbird. And if it did a fly pass, you're going to go, why did you send that for the fly pass? So it's, Well, I think, and it was up for some maintenance, so it got retired as well. Yeah, I wouldn't call their B-57 a Canberra. It's come a long way. It's got bigger wings, bigger engines, bigger everything. Although one landed gear up last year, I think, somewhere in the US. The B-57, obviously different cockpit configuration. It was more of a fighter nav configuration, which would have been nice to fly, I think, in a way. Other than that, there's a lot of commonality. When we went after the aeroplane and the crew, Herbert and Carver, in Vietnam, we were not sure whether we'd found a B-57, which had gone down the same area, or the Canberra, because a lot of the parts were interchangeable. And they recovered a plaque and a plate from, see the wingtip there where the tip tanks go. Was either there or it was from the bomb rack, but it was a plate from a bomb release mechanism. And it was when they sent it back, they were in country and they were on the ground and they were taking photographs, and each night sending them back via sat phone. When they sent that back to the museum said they say that's a US Air Force release mechanism. Then they went to all the 2 Squadron vets and said, did we ever cross-pollinate and use US Air Force equipment? And they were adamant, never. We went, oh, shit, well, this must be the B-57. It proves that actually we did use US Air Force, and it happened to be on our jet when it crashed. So there's obviously a lot of commonality in bits. The bit that we knew it was ours was actually the tyre, the NLO or the UNL or whatever it was. There was a couple of letters on a bit of rubber that showed it was a Dunlop tyre. That, mind you, the US Air Force could have used our tyres as well. But anyway, we took it that they used Goodyears and we used Dunlop. That was how we confirmed it was ours. Plus, Mike Herbert, who was the pilot, had a little metal disc. It was made by 2 Squadron. It was called the Ugly Club. It was one of those challenge coins, but early version. And it was a 2 Squadron Troops drinking club. And so when we found this disc with the Ugly Club on it, we came back and said, were any of the 2 Squadron aircrew a member of this? And one of the 2 Squadron crews came up and said, yeah, no, Mike Herbert was a member of that. And that was when we knew that was him, which meant that set of remains was Mike Herbert. So the other set of remains had to be Rob Carver. Yeah. Again, it's a long story. I'd love to give you the full story at some stage, because it was a huge team effort to bring them back home. Yeah. All right. If that's it, everyone's happy.